Food access dignity/disclosure education. A few important broad terms that we will frame our examination of people with developmental and intellectual disabilities and how they fit into our communities of employment, recreation, and education, and the perceived experiences by which those individuals arrive at their self-efficacy and level of self-determination. Cultural competence, defined set of values and principles, policy belief, structure attitude to conduct self-assessment, value diversity, manage difference, adapt to diversity across sets of individuals, families, and communities. Linguistic competence ability to convey information that is easily understood by diverse individuals. Respond effectively to health and mental health literacy needs through cross-cultural communication approach, brokers, bilingual staff, and technology, varied approach, especially important for organizations doing release of information, consent, confidentiality, application, signage, applications, health, and public educational materials. Easy to read for low literacy. Some terms to be defined. Culturally appropriate, cultural broker, culture, disability, disparity, disproportionality, equity, ethnicity, policy, race, resiliency, healthy, disparity. Prologue. One day, you'll just be a memory to some people. Do your best to be a good one. Unknown during this time that we are going through, it is our own inner journey that will help us. The external world will not change, until we look at the world within ourselves and make a conscious effort to find peace in our own self. Steve Lavoie. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Viktor E. Frankl. When one tugs at a single thing in nature, he finds it attached to the rest of the world. John Muir. Find out who you are and be that person. That's what your soul was put on this earth to be. Find that truth, live that truth, and everything else will come. Ellen DeGeneres. Your life has purpose, your story is important, your voice matters. You find peace not by rearranging the circumstances of your life, but by realizing you are at the deepest level. Eckhart Tolle. Today more than ever before, life must be characterized by a sense of universal responsibility, not only nation to nation and human to human, but also to all other forms of life. The Dalai Lama. Believe in yourself. Have faith in your abilities. Treat each person as the sacred being they are. Make sure that the things you do are in alignment with the things you say and think. There is no pillow so soft as a clear conscience. French proverb. May love form your path, joy fill your health, and peace be the work of your hands. Bob Holmes. The strong don't put others down. They lift them up. To make a difference in someone's life you just have to care. Make the most of yourself, for that is all there is of you. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Always be a first-rate version of yourself, instead of a second-rate version of somebody else. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Martin Luther King, Jr. Did you ever realize that whenever you left love, you irrevocably lifted the entire planet into the light? There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. Elie Wiesel. The beauty of the world lies in the diversity of its people. We've developed a cognitive immunity with the open sewers of social media. The controversy of developing the immune system and self-sustainability. How do we save lives and livelihood? We have an inability to see different pathways. It's difficult to get out of lockdown institutions. There is no definition for metabolism in medical sense. We don't define health and can't define metabolic disease. Processed foods and trans fats. The best thing for your body. Stop eating seed oils. We need to end the fear. What's killing the younger people is the inflammation when your body is trying to kill the virus, but people have these rouge oils in the body. Seed oils drop cholesterol levels. Harsh processing and toxins. Highly processed distort the flora and have fewer of the bad type of oil. Coronavirus is impacting people of color at higher rates in communities have lower access to healthy foods and governments subsidize the bad food. The cards are stacked against us. A call for the evolution of inclusion. The 20th century brought a wave of technological and medical advancement which transformed what we think of healthcare today. Before 1945, if your loved one was in an accident, you best wait for a doctor to come to you, and you would either recover or die at home. All of this changed after World War II with how wounded soldiers received care to save people from life-threatening injuries. Breakthroughs with disinfectants and imaging shifted the public discourse around hospitals. Their reputation changed to the first line of defense instead of the last resort, a phrase repeated by many journalists, with life-saving concepts of blood banks and technology like defibrillator. In 1946, the Hill-Burton Act, which funded the construction of over 6,800 facilities nationwide, enabled communities to build their first emergency departments. A new moral, ethical imperative arose that no one deserved to die a preventable death. With new emergency departments and faith in modern medicine at an all-time high, ER visits increased 400% between 1940 and 1955, and that growth did not reflect a bumper crop of emergencies. Rather, it reveals that Americans had higher expectations for health care but were only partially covered by a patchwork insurance system, creating a perfect storm that broke over the nation's emergency rooms. Historian Beatrix Hoffman has analyzed 3 causes of overuse in the 1950s and 1960s. First, due to a doctor shortage and greater geographical mobility, many people lacked personal physicians and went to the ER for ordinary illnesses. Second, though many middle-class people carried partial health insurance, it was usually limited to hospital services. When they learned this, sometimes by receiving bills for things they thought were covered, patients defaulted to the ER to avoid the out-of-pocket expense of preventative care. The industry's messaging about the life-saving power of medicine inadvertently created an ethical imperative that no one deserved to die a preventable death. Administrators soon realized that many of these patients couldn't pay their bills, but the public responded with outrage when hospitals turned people away, leading to a 1986 law mandating emergency treatment. Historian Beatrix Hoffman has analyzed 3 causes of overuse in the 1950s and 1960s. First, due to a doctor shortage and greater geographical mobility, many people lacked personal physicians and went to the ER for ordinary illnesses. Second, though many middle-class people carried partial health insurance, it was usually limited to hospital services. When they learned this, sometimes by receiving bills for things they thought were covered, patients defaulted to the ER to avoid the out-of-pocket expense of preventative care. Finally, even if you had a personal physician and could pay, it was increasingly hard to get seen. A generation before, you could summon the town doctor at any time of the day or night for a house call. By the 1940s, doctors were keeping what seemed to patients like very leisurely hours, most clocked out at 5 p.m., and on Sundays and Wednesdays. The sick might have to wait weeks for an appointment. When patients called them after hours, doctors often referred them to the emergency room, where they faced increasingly long waits. There's no single reason why the emergency room serves as first resort for so many Americans today, but its history of absorbing patients set adrift in a changing healthcare system suggests that it will bear the impact of changes to come. And that leads us to today's crisis and dilemma, a nation divided. How do we serve, responsibly, build a bridge, and empower others to live their best life? May 23, 2020, Hong Kong, Reuters. For Chinese leader Xi Jinping, it is a high-stakes power play. His move to impose tough national security laws on Hong Kong risks reigniting pro-democracy protests that plunged the city into chaos last year, increasing tensions in an already fraught relationship with the United States and undermining Hong Kong's status as a global financial hub. Hong Kong still has not completed legislation on national security since its return to China, said a person with direct knowledge of Beijing's thinking. After the endless protests, it's time for Beijing to say enough is enough. The mainland authorities did not immediately respond to questions from Reuters. Lam said in a statement on Friday that she deeply believed the new law will seek to practically and effectively prevent and curb acts and activities that seriously undermine national security, as well as sanction those who undermine national security by advocating Hong Kong independence and resorting to violence. The COVID-19 pandemic that began late last year in the Chinese city of Wuhan is battering the global economy. The death toll now exceeds 330,000 worldwide. China's inability to initially contain the virus, and evidence that it suppressed information about the outbreak, has damaged its international standing. A report presented early last month by the Ministry of State Security to XI and other Chinese leaders contained a stark warning. Reuters reported, global anti-China sentiment was at its highest since the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown. Compounding Beijing's discomfort, Taiwan's government under President Tsai Ing-wen is basking in international acclaim for its success in containing the infection and avoiding serious economic harm. So far, Taiwan has had 441 confirmed cases of coronavirus and just 7 deaths. China claims Taiwan as its own territory and has never renounced the use of force to assert that sovereignty. I think there has been a significant change in China, in Beijing, since Xi Jinping became president or dictator for life, complete with a personality cult which is extraordinary, Patton told members of the city's Foreign Correspondents' Club in an online presentation earlier this week. I think the sad point is that Xi Jinping and his court have regarded Hong Kong and Hong Kong's freedoms as an existential problem for them because Hong Kong represents so much of what they don't like. After the two leaders took up their new posts, the liaison office sparked a controversy when it said in a statement last month that it had the power, along with the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, to handle Hong Kong affairs. Pro-democracy supporters in the city condemned the move as a clear threat to Hong Kong's autonomy. The liaison office and Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office did not immediately respond to questions. In a speech on April 15, Luo also signaled that new national security laws were in the pipeline. For the nearly 23 years since Hong Kong's return to the motherland, the system for safeguarding national security in Hong Kong has had shortcomings and could be fatal at critical moments, Luo said. New laws were needed without delay, he added. On Thursday, 5 weeks after Luo spoke, Beijing made its dramatic announcement: Chinese-style national security is coming to China's freest city. May 23, 2020. COVID-19, Debt and the Constitution. Prasad Krishnamurti, opinion contributor. Despite recent efforts to reopen, state economies are sinking under the combined weight of COVID-19 and state-mandated economic suppression. With no income to pay the bills, businesses and workers will soon be submerged in debt. After the Revolutionary War, many states passed laws granting debt relief, and the framers included the Contracts Clause in the Constitution to limit this practice. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, courts routinely struck down debtor-friendly state laws. This all changed during the Great Depression. In Home Building and Loan Association v. Blaisdell, 1934, the Supreme Court held that a Minnesota statute extending the time that borrowers could occupy and repurchase property after foreclosure did not violate the Contracts Clause. During the extension period, the principal remained, interest accumulated, and the borrower was required to pay rent. Accordingly, the court found the statute to be a temporary and legitimate response to an emergency that imposed reasonable conditions on borrowers and lenders. Under Blaisdell, the COVID-19 debt relief bills would be constitutional if enacted. Despite impairing contractual obligations, the bills would advance two key public purposes. First, as in Blaisdell, they would reduce defaults on consumer debt, which unfairly and inefficiently concentrates risk on borrowers during a downturn. Second, by reducing foreclosures and automobile repossessions, the bills would mitigate COVID-19 health risks, and the state's police powers are at their height in matters of public health and safety. Third, courts traditionally defer to legislative expertise in Contracts Clause cases involving private contracts. Here, the bill's provisions are presumptively reasonable because they closely track the relief provisions for federally insured mortgages in the recent CARES Act. Since Ogden v. Saunders, 1827, it has been settled that the Contracts Clause's prohibitions only apply retrospectively to contracts in existence at the time a law is passed. Subsequent contracts are unaffected because, at the time of formation, they are set to incorporate all existing laws as implied terms. Still, few matters are truly settled in constitutional law. The Supreme Court could decide to resurrect Chief Justice John Marshall's dissenting view in Ogden v. Saunders, 1827, that the Contracts Clause applies prospectively. But this would overturn nearly 200 years of judicial precedent. Until then, the Constitution does not prohibit states from enacting reasonable debt relief in response to COVID-19. And it certainly does not prevent states from planning ahead for the next pandemic. Headlines from CNN: Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook CEO and co-founder, defended the company's position in a speech last year in Washington, but noted there may be some exceptions. Even for politicians, we don't allow content that incites violence or risks imminent harm, and of course we don't allow voter suppression, he said. Arresting reporters at a protest is an affront to the First Amendment. Friday morning's episode had some echoes of Ferguson, Missouri, where numerous journalists were detained while covering protests in 2014. At the time, the American Society of News Editors called it a top-down effort to restrict First Amendment rights. For every reporter they arrest, every image they block, every citizen they censor, another will still write, photograph and speak, the group said. According to CNBC, I don't think that Facebook or internet platforms in general should be arbiters of truth, Zuckerberg told Sorkin in an interview that aired Thursday morning. Political speech is one of the most sensitive parts in a democracy, and people should be able to see what politicians say. Although Facebook does use independent fact-checkers who review content on its social networks, the point of the fact-checkers is to really catch the worst of the worst stuff, Zuckerberg said. The point of that program isn't to try to parse words on is something slightly true or false, he said. In terms of political speech, again, I think you want to give broad deference to the political process and political speech. Facebook announced in October that it would allow politicians to run ads on the social network, even if they include misinformation. The company, however, does have lines that no one, including politicians, is allowed to cross, Zuckerberg said. No one is allowed to use Facebook to cause violence or harm themselves, or to post misinformation that could lead to voter suppression, Zuckerberg said.